Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to Not Funny Guys Presents Red Dwarf Rewatch. Before we jump into this, please like, subscribe, comment, write to us. Tell me if you're liking this format. Give me some suggestions. I'm always open to that. But we are now continuing our Red Dwarf exploration of Series 4. We're at the midway point here, so usually 6 episodes, and we have arrived at Episode 3, Justice. As our usual suspects, directed by Ed By and written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, this was released originally on the 28th of February, 1991, when I was a wee lad. But let's get into it, starting with a summary. So the crew have picked up an escape pod bearing a woman's name. We'll talk about that later. There's also a possibility that it may be a deranged biomechanical killer in the pod instead of her, which was on its way, part of a prison ship on its way to Justice World, a deep space penal colony. They decide to themselves, the crew, go to Justice World to discover the contents of the pod. Things become kind of awkward and out of place when it is the scan that is done on Justice World reveals that Rimmer is complacent and apparently guilty of the deaths of all the crew of the Red Dwarf for his failure to secure the drive crate. 1,167 separate counts of second-degree murder, and he is promptly convicted and sentenced. But that's just the beginning. So let's break this episode down. Now, we start off in the med bay with Lister head under a towel. Crichton has entered, taking care of him. He has a massive head. Apparently, he has got some swelling coming down from these space mumps. He's quite hideous, which is he accounts for the fact of why Kat and Rimmer haven't come to see them. Crichton apparently will not yet let have a mirror. Lister does fondly refer to him as Florence Nightingale. Ha 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 ha. He has hot lager and croutons for breakfast. Disgusting. But yes, so Kat and Rimmer, like we said, have not visited. Rimmer apparently is off on a holiday, rambling through the diesel decks, and is working on putting together a slideshow for which sounds like a worse punishment, and we'll see later. Kat has apparently been occupied with pod business, which Crichton then gets mad at himself because he was not supposed to tell Lister. They found an escape pod with a cryo-freeze frozen survivor, possibly a woman. This is, according to Lister, the first woman in 3 million years, and look at his state he's in. He decides to get on the case. So Holly informs him that the pod is named as Barbara Bellini, which is the name, but they don't know the situation as it really is. It might be her inside. Kat, when Lister does see him and is like, "Thanks for coming to visit me," he's like, "Why would I come to visit? Look at you. You're hideous. You could double date with the Elephant Man and he'd be the looker." Not exactly a nice reference, but yeah, probably. Apparently they put the pod in the quarters, which is an interesting idea. Kat and Lister are fighting over who's basically going to get her to date her, basically. They haven't even met her. Apparently the cat talks about some animal being able to thrust its pelvis so many times, and he says, "Look, that's me in slow mode. He says here, quote, "Put a Black & Decker drill on me and I can thrust through walls." They come in, they've started the dethaw. He's upset with them, and he said the pod came from a prison ship. There were 2 survivors of whatever happened on board, 1 prisoner, 1 guard. Only one of them got in the pod. They don't know which one. And it was on the black box recordings, which he then chides them. And I have to say, Rimmer's right. For once, he's demonstrating important research skills here, folks. He actually took the time to do this, and he's thinking with his head rather than his crotch. So now they're in a bit of dilemma. So if it's not Bellini inside, it's one of the prisoners on the ship, which was apparently carrying, quote, 40 psychotic, half-crazed, mass-murdering, super-strong androids. It's very risky. Now, Crichton steps in here to correct them and said they're not androids, they're simulants. Androids apparently would not rip out your human spine. Simulants would. Holly can't see through this and scan it because there's lead lining to survive in space. To find out, they just have to apparently wait 24 hours and see who comes out and if they survive it. Kat is basically planning on this idea that maybe they should ambush it, and Crichton then informs them that simulants are basically near indestructible. So they're coming up short with these countermeasures. Rimmer wants to basically blast the pod back into space, and again, Rimmer here is coming up with the most normal, most rational plan. He really is. I don't know what's happening, to be honest with you. But instead, they decide to take Holly's advice, which is to go to the penal colony that this ship was originally going to, because they should have the facilities to contain it. And then they can wait and see what happens. Opens, it's Bellini, let her out. If not, leave the prisoner. So they take Starbug to the rest of the way. And while they're en route to the final stages, Crichton is in back watching Rimmer's slideshow, looking like he wants to basically kill himself. It reminds me, because I just recently watched this, the movie Airplane, when Ted Stryker's character gets on the airplane and all of his seatmates and co-passengers sitting next to him either kill themselves or act like they're going to kill themselves, indicating that he's a very boring storyteller. Great flick. And while they're taking the simulant, you hear a splat in the pilot control room. Lister's giant head basically popped, and it got spray all over the cat. And he is so disgusting. Lister says he feels so much better, even though he looks like he threw up on himself. Arriving at the facility, the mainframe is still working, and they get the announcement, "Welcome to Justice World." No clearance are allowed for them to come on board, but they are allowed access on a temporary basis, and they basically get assigned escort boots. Kat refers to them as Frankenstein hand-me-downs. It's a good one. And these things are basically on their feet, marching them around in a very awkward fashion. Then they are subjected to a mind probe, a search for evidence of criminal activity in their subconscious and conscious. Lister is quite upset with this. He feels it's very evasive. And he's like talking about what if he accidentally something concealed possible crimes. And Rimmer claims to be clean, of course. And then Lister goes on to talk about how they used to steal cars, but he got caught, so he was punished. And Crichton's trying to reassure him. And then he stole a mattress from an entire furniture set to furnish his unfurnished flat. So he feels like he's actually done some things, stupid things. All of them are judged. Crichton is, of course, immediately granted release from the boots and access, so is the cat. Lister is reminded of his past petty crimes, but he's basically cleared and allowed to leave as well. So now they're all staying there. Well, Rimmer, though, not so lucky. He is found guilty of second-degree murder, as I said in the summary, of the entire crew of Red Dwarf. And with all those sentences together, he's sentenced to 9,328 years in prison for his negligence for not resealing the drive plate. And since he's a hologram, he gets to serve them all consecutively. Now, basically, Rimmer is hauled off to the Justice Zone, where it apparently is impossible to commit a crime. We now flash forward. Lister comes to see him in his cell. Crichton tells him that Crichton's filing an appeal on Rimmer's behalf. The whole area is covered in what's called the Justice Field, and Rimmer's explaining this to Lister. It's impossible to commit a crime. Lister then is encouraged to test it by setting fire to the sheets, which in fact he catches fire instead. Rimmer finds this amusing, Lister not so much. It's the same with all crimes. Rimmer says, quote, "Perfect system, you are forced to conform. Culpability is not guilt, though. This is going to be Crichton's key defense, that Rimmer was culpable but not guilt, and that was a mistake of the scam. Basically, they're going to argue that Rimmer is an incompetent buffoon, and Crichton is going to do this well. So they go to the trial. First time, we really also get a full punctuation of Rimmer's middle name. I don't know if I've hit this previously. It's been a while. Judas. And immediately Rimmer is not liking the direction of this defense. Crichton then goes on to demean the hell out of him with the basic premise of him telling him, as he continually objects, that I've got to make you look like a complete incompetent moron. So he refers to him as being like a glorified security guard, thinking that, you know, if he's in charge, he's the CEO of the corporation, and this is why he thought the ship was his in his mind, and it was all his fault. So he's trying to make this idea that in Rimmer's mind he feels guilty, even though he's not really fully responsible because he's not competent to be. Of course, they emphasize the 13 times he failed the astronavigational exam. Calls Lister to the thing. Lister is asked to give his occupation, and he blanks and eventually says bum. And then he is asked about he says, does anybody care about Rimmer? And he's like, basically me, it's only me. He didn't have any friends. And then he says Rimmer was the leader of Zed's shift, and when asked about what they were in charge of, he basically said they were making sure the vending machines were stocked and the food dispensers were working. That was basically their job. And that Rimmer was so pathetic, he sewed his name onto his ship-issued condoms. Basically totally shaming and bashing him. Quote, the only thing Rimmer is guilty of is being Arnold J. Rimmer. And this is the thing that basically Crichton's closing arm. His punishment is being himself. And he wins the appeal. Yay! After getting blasted. So they go back to Starbug, and of course, Rimmer's going on about how your lies were so convincing. But then they find that the Bellini pod is open. And guess what? It wasn't her. It was the prisoner. It was the simulant. And so they now run for their lives. He shoots the little escort shoes when they try to come get him too, and one runs away. And they end up leading him into the Justice Zone, and he's now hunting them. He simply then tries to lure them out by saying he just wants the code to the Starbug so he can leave. And Lister decides to go talk to him. He won't shoot him in the back, which is good. We'll find out. Of course, the simulant is lying. He has a weapon. Lister lied too. He brought a pipe, but apparently the simulant lied twice. He brought a gun and a knife. Simulant then shoots Lister twice, but the bullets hit him instead. Lister then proceeds to strike him with a pipe, but then only ends up whacking himself in the head. It's all backfiring, and Lister finally figured this out as the simulant then proceeds to try and throw the knife at him many times, and they just keep stabbing him. And then he keeps handing him more and more things to clock him over the head, and all the damage is being incurred on the simulant, and finally the simulant tries to choke him, only to choke himself. And so he's won. Now, as the simulant is laying dying, the cat shows up to save the day, whacking the simulant on the head with a shovel, which he only inflicts the pain on himself. Finally, they get back to Red Dwarf, and Lister is going on and on about this pursuit of perfect justice and how it negates free will, getting very philosophical, and everyone is basically behind him hating this lecture. He then falls into a manhole, for which they shut on him as they think, oh goodness, thank goodness he stopped talking. All right, great one. Now, next time we'll move on to White Hole. But as I was saying, in the meantime, please like and subscribe, share, give me feedback, let me know things I can be doing to make some improvements. I appreciate it. So we're going to keep going with this Red Dwarf rewatch, so please stick around and continue following and liking and all that stuff for what we've got going here. If you want to check out some other stuff by the Not Funny Guys, we also have our Not Funny Guys Presents Off the Reels, which is our main podcast where we talk about movies. We got it. We're at least halfway now. I swear. We got to be over halfway now through the Star Wars. Only the films and only in the chronological in-universe. So we started with episode 1, and then we did episode 2, episode 3. We then did Solo, then Rogue One. We did New Hope, and then we now will be coming up on Empire Strikes Back next week before we move on with the final 4 films after that, including the sequels. Not looking forward to the sequels. Everything else has been great so far, generally speaking. But that's what we're doing over there. Right now, as I am recording this episode, Casey and Eric, my 2 fellow Not Funny Guys, are en route to Orlando for Fright Night. So you should expect to see a lot of content being pushed out by them on our socials, which you can find in the description below. They will be doing a lot of stuff, and this is in conjunction with their podcast. They do Wrestling with the Horror of It All, where they talk about wrestling and horror films. So check out their content, check out that podcast, like and subscribe there. And if you want to write us about this or any of our other works, which you do have one other podcast I'll talk about in just a second, notfunnyguys.offthereels@gmail.com, in the description and in the little ticker below, where you can write us directly and ask us questions, give us suggestions, feedback. All that stuff is very much welcome. And like I said, we do have one other final podcast, which is the one I do with our Not Funny gal, Dr. Kristen, where we talk about things we are thinking about, which is academic teaching, all kinds of things. Our latest episode that just went up is about liberalism and illiberalism in our current state. And so we talk about things. We end up talking about revolutions and Mike Duncan and some of my favorite other podcasts along the way. But we have a good time. We keep it usually a little bit shorter than some of the other pods, but we try to have a good time talking about different things that we are thinking about, things that we find interesting that, cover the whole broad range of culture. But as I said, like, subscribe, share. If you're interested in any of these things, or if the YouTube channel, which we will continue to cover television shows. So got some things lining up, but for right now, we're going to keep going on Red Dwarf. So I hope you will stay around. And remember, don't be a smeghead. Keep it not funny, and I'll see you next time.